this video will be about mental health in astrology. A very controversial topic. Nobody likes to talk about mental health in astrology. So I want to teach you a little bit about how you can use astrology to work with a shadow. Now, as you know, the shadow, according to Carl Jung, is basically the repressed part of a psyche which works in the background. So if you're in a conversation with someone and you have a shadow, the shadow may try to get a goal which is actually not in your best interest, but it is modifying your behavior and it can get you unfavorable outcomes if you're not aware of your shadow, if you don't know how to work with it. So if you're a people pleaser, or if you're a narcissist, or if you are somebody who has a lot of trouble in relationships, a lot of disharmony, or a lot of anxiety. So all of these things can point at some kind of shadow. And of course, if you work in psychology, you don't meet many astrologers in psychology. But Carl Jung, which was a psychologist, which was actually not a psychologist, ironically, one of the most famous psychologists in history, was also into astrology. Yeah? Like he talked about the archetypes, how they show up in the natal chart, how they work through you. But of course, nobody wants to acknowledge that, nobody wants to talk about that. And we kind of simply seem to forget a lot that if you are an astrologer, you're working with a psyche. You're working with a blueprint for what creates psychological urges, which then change your behavior. And you create an identity to support those behaviors. So for example, if you have a water dominant chart, which is most of my viewers probably, because I'm water dominant, then you'll feel like introverted, intuitive, sensitive, maybe even a little bit paranoid of other people's energy, a cleaner and the processor of energy. And in order to support that, in order to work with that, you create an identity. So you establish certain mechanisms to protect yourself. Yeah? For example, a water element person would have to protect themselves against entanglements. A water element person needs detachment to protect themselves because they're too sensitive. They get attached too easily. They make cords too easily because they're always creating their psychic tentacles to reach out to other people. So you know, based on the chart, you can see what are likely defense mechanisms a person is going to develop to balance themselves out, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to balance yourself out. You are doing it intuitively all the time anyways, so why wouldn't you use astrology to see what exactly is going on psychologically in your shadow? There are certain planets connected to shadows. For example, Pluto could show you the shadow of control. Why do you like to take a lot of control? It could also be rigid control, because Pluto is about the fixed sign Scorpio. So where you have a lot of fear or a lot of repression or too much control, that is Pluto by the house in your chart and the aspects. Now if you have Saturn in a house or an aspect, it would be also too much control, but could also be judgmental tendencies. Maybe you're judging yourself a lot. If Saturn is on the ascendant, the sun, the moon, or the midheaven, then you're judging yourself too much, protecting yourself too much, trying to avoid getting into trouble, trying to avoid negative consequences somehow. Because Saturn is about karma. So Saturn in the chart shows you the shadow of where you're trying to protect yourself from karma rigidly. Too much, actually. So, what's next? Jupiter. Yes, even the positive planet Jupiter can show you about the shadow. So if you have Jupiter in house and aspect, you could be grandiose in that area of life. It's malignant optimism. That's the shadow of this planet. Malignant optimism because it's a planet of idealism. So it's where you are naturally having the tendency to idealize your own actions in that area, or where you feel very optimistic about the outcome. Well, it could be too optimistic, right? That's always possible. And it also could be too expensive, taking too many risks, taking on too much in that house, too much responsibility, or trying to burn yourself out because you're so excited about that area of your life and you spend too much energy on it. Because it's also the planet of access. So it could be indulgence. Yeah. So indulgence in the shadow could show you, oh, if I have Jupiter in the 5th, which is mine, my indulgence would be paying too much attention to my performance, to how I look to people. Oh, are people loving me? And if people like me, then this indulgence could be trying to get people to like me more and more and more, because I like that with Jupiter in the 5th. Yes, that kind of bullshit you can see with Jupiter. You can also see next planet, Neptune. Neptune is a big one. I almost refer to Neptune as a malefic because Neptune is really problematic. Unlike the other planets, if you have a shadow with Neptune, it's far more difficult to identify. It's far less clear if what you have is a bad thing or a good thing. So let's say you had Neptune in the 2nd house. Then you could be malignant detached from your money, or you could be paranoid of losing your money, or you could be hypersensitive to your possessions and your stability and security. You could be afraid of losing it all because Neptune is a planet of losses. It's a planet of paranoia. It's a planet of illusions and confusion. It's a planet of too much detachment. So you see, it's very easy to identify shadows based on the house of a planet. It's not rocket science, really. But for some reason, the community pretends like, oh no, we should not talk about this. Yeah, because you're retarded. That's why That's why you don't want to talk about it. So next planet would be Uranus. Uranus is also like Neptune about malignant detachment, but in a rational, logical way. So you may justify your detachment with good enough reasons. And it's about rebelliousness. So where you try to break the rules and where you try to break out of restrictions. And it's also a planet of speed. So that house could show you where you're very impatient and you want to move things along. And it's also a fixed energy because it's fixed in Aquarius. So it could also mean that you're trying to control the outcome by trying to make sure that here you're not going to submit to any rules. So you could be rigid in being malignant independent in that house. Yeah. So this is basically it for planets, outer planets. But of course, that is just really the surface. Like, if you go into the asteroids, like Chiron, Orcus, Nessus, if you go into Lilith, Ceres, if you go into the astro goddesses like Juno, Pallas, I mean, there's just a whole circus, really. A circus of shadow aspects in the natal chart. There's so many. And why shouldn't we pay attention to that? Why shouldn't we look into that? So if you have Pallas somewhere, it could show you where you are too defensive, where you're too protective, where you're a little bit too self-aware, where you're hyper-vigilant. Because this is the planet of armor. This is the planet of wisdom through defensiveness and warfare, strategy. So where you are a little bit too strategic, a little bit too intellectual, a little bit too defensive. Yeah, that's Pallas. So if you have Ceres, that would be the planet of rebirth and death, but through conservation and restoration. Because Ceres is about restoring what you have lost, it would be about keeping what you have regained a little bit too much, so it could be great fear of losses in that house where Ceres is. Could be great fear of losing control over what you have. If you have Ceres on a natal planet like Sun or Moon, it could be really, really huge shadow. Because if Ceres is trying to protect her emotions, the Moon, prevent the emotions from going negative, from going bad, being afraid of losing one's emotional regulation, this could point to massive control issues or paranoia, dysregulation. The asteroids can be huge when you have it in aspect with a planet. Huge, fucking massive. Cannot be understated at all. So if you have Chiron, I mean everybody knows Chiron, right? The wounded healer, means that it's the bottom wound, the bottom trauma, I like to say. So if you have Chiron on Mars, like I have, you may struggle asserting your masculinity. You may feel like your masculinity is wrong. You may feel like, oh, I don't know what it's like to be a man. Maybe it's been shamed and blamed and blocked so many times that you feel like you hit your head against the wall. So that's Chiron. Hitting your head against the wall repeatedly to the point of giving up. Because Chiron has the nature of Saturn and Pluto. Malignant lessons, tragic endings, crises. Because of course Chiron's fate was tragic. He died from his arrow. He couldn't heal himself. So it's about issues where we feel like we can't heal ourselves. Of course we can. But the shadow is that you feel or believe that you can't. Right? So if you have Lilith, that would be an issue of self-rejection, rejection wounds, feeling like you're either rejecting other people very strongly, other people's ideas, or yourself. It's about great separation from the group, as the nature of Uranus and Pluto, Lilith. So it may be where you go into taboos, like Pluto, but you break the rules, like Uranus. So a taboo rule breaker could mean that you are ostracized, villainized, demonized. Of course, because Lilith was called a demon. So Lilith in the chart shows you where you are called a demon for being yourself. So what could be the shadow of that? That you're afraid of being a demon, that you're afraid of being yourself, that you're afraid of rejection. So that's basically it, yeah? That's the shadow of Lilith. So is why are people sleeping on this again? Orcus. So if you have Orcus, let's say you have Orcus on Mars or the Sun or Jupiter on a fire planet or whatever, it would mean that Orcus is holding that planet hostage. Because Orcus is about hostage situation. Orcus is about situation where you develop Stockholm syndrome with your perpetrators, or you get stuck and imprisoned because you feel like you can't break away. You can't separate. You're not allowed to separate with Orcus. You're not allowed to chop. Yeah, it's about chopping. It's an axe that cuts the head off, the head of a snake. Which means if somebody gets you stuck in the head, like a psychopath or a narcissist, Orcus is supposed to help you to get out of that. But of course, why would you need help in the first place? Unless you're already getting stuck by a psychopath or something, or trauma in the head. So Orcus shows you where you get stuck in the head, because you're not allowed to be there. You're not allowed to separate. You're not allowed to make your own choices. You're supposed to comply, to conform to a contract. You're supposed to be a guide. You're supposed to be a servant. You feel like you're supposed to be, but of course you're not supposed to be. But that's the shadow. You are supposed to be nice and kind and sweet. I'm just gonna play by the rules. And yeah, then you get imprisoned by the rules. So that's Orcus as its shadow. So then you have Nessus. If you have Nessus in the natal chart, then you're dealing with a hood. Like you put a hood on. You know, if you put a hood on, that's like somebody who's done something or about to do something which is going to get him into trouble. So maybe you are branded as the troublemaker. So Nessus can show you in which area of life you have to hide yourself under a cloak. Because whatever you're doing is regarded unethical, wrong, bad by other people. So here, the shadow would be, I'm afraid that I am bad. I'm the bad guy if I do this. So I try not to do it. It's very similar to Lilith, but it's masculine. Think about the masculine version of Lilith. That's Nessus. Masculine means you're supposed to, instead of attracting magnetically through your sexuality like Lilith, you're more into shaking things down aggressively and breaking something apart, but very, very ambitiously, because these are plutonic aspects. Yeah, there's a strong ambition, a strong drive to transform and heal with the asteroids, but the drive is repressed all the time, and that's why we deal with a shadow with those asteroids. So if you don't know any of those asteroids in your chart, if you don't know anything about them, if you don't know what's going on, well, why wouldn't you want to know? Why wouldn't you want to investigate? I mean, it's just crazy to me that people sleep on this. But a lot of people do. A lot of people ignore the asteroids. They ignore the fixed stars. They ignore the additional objects, which can be Lilith, which can be the nodes even. Even some people ignore the nodes. I mean, most people ignore astrology, period. So it shouldn't be a surprise. But then again, most people also ignore psychology. Most people are psychologically illiterate. Most people are so disconnected from psychology and themselves, they go for religion. They go for drugs. They go for some kind of external validation somewhere, instead of learning how to address their own problems. They go for vices. Yeah, religion is a vice. Drugs are a vice. Getting validation can be a vice. If you're using it to regulate your life, if you're using it to calm down, well, why would you be upset in the first place? Which is fine to be upset. But then you should fix it through psychology, obviously. Oh yeah, don't tell me to should. Yeah, you should do it through psychology, because if you don't, then the only alternative is to use a vice. Really, it's the only alternative. You either have psychology, yeah, being a Carl Jung, like doing shadow work, right? You either do shadow work or you take drugs. or you use people as emotional regulation nannies. Yeah, you psychically vamp, you siphon people, you fucking steal energy from people. Like, those are the only two options. Beside psychology, that's all you have. Like, you know. So of course you want to go into astrology then, so you can use it as a diagnostic tool. You look in your chart, and then you look at your psychology aspects. So that's basically it, yeah, for the planets and the asteroids. I could also do a video on houses and signs next, which I'm going to do, but for now that should be enough. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. It helps me to boost my algorithm, to help me. And if you do, thank you very much, and see you in the next video.